In my previous, most recent video, I showed you how I built out the KEF LS60 Wireless with a turntable, a CD transport, and a pair of subwoofers. And those subwoofers are the KC62 from KEF. I started out with no subs, then I added one, and then two. So today I want to discuss the measurable and audible differences between those three scenarios. And we'll do that with music you might read about over at Resident Advisor.
This episode is brought to you by AudioQuest. The cable company believes great audio performance begins with great power. Visit audioquest.com for more information.
So the KC62 is a compact subwoofer with side firing and force cancelling drivers. Those drivers are 6.5 inches across. They are powered by a Class D amplifier, just like the twin bass arrays in the LS60. But it's important to note here that the LS60 houses two pairs of 5.25 inch bass drivers. Now, terrific for beginners is the KEF Connect app, which makes it a breeze to cross over the KEF subwoofers with the LS60 Wireless. And KEF's engineers have calculated the necessary settings for us for those KEF subwoofers, and they've put those settings into the Connect app. And therefore the app sets the gain compensation, the low pass filter, and the high pass filter that's applied to the LS60 themselves. All we have to do is turn the sub's gain rotary on the back panel to its midpoint, and the DSP takes care of the rest. So we can then tweak according to taste if we want to, but I left well alone to see how the default settings performed. Now, the most obvious reason to add a sub to the LS60 is to achieve deeper bass reach. So these active floor standards are rated by KEF as 3 dB down at 31 Hz. So on paper, it sounds like they would go low enough. But as we saw in my previous video, the LS60 begin to roll off in my acoustically treated room here at around 40 Hz. And we also saw that they are more than 10 dB down in this room at 31 Hz. So if I want to hear what's going on with the sub bass on Pitch Black's Dub Smoke or Plastic Man's Consumed, I need a subwoofer. Now, KEF rates the KC62 as 3 dB down at 11 Hz. Now, some might query the SPL at 11 Hz on the KC62, but there's no doubt about it, this subwoofer extends the LS60 system's bass reach. And we can turn the sub on and off with a single click inside the KEF Connect app, which in turn makes lighter work of any side-by-side comparison. So I built a playlist of bass bangers in Tidal to play inside Roon, because Roon integrates Tidal. It also integrates Cobas as well, but I mainly use Tidal. And I chose the tracks in the playlist because there's little point in playing music that doesn't contain sub-bass information, i.e. below 40 Hz. So that playlist starts with the future sound of London's Lifeforms. I mentioned that in the last video. It features Liz Fraser of the Cocteau Twins, and then it goes on to An Eagle in Your Mind by Boards of Canada, which is from their first album, Music Has the Right to Children, which is a very eerie, strange sounding electronic music album. Then more of a kind of bass banger, Fat Planet by Left Field. Then Aerodynamique, I think that's how you say it. That's by Kraftwerk, right? Everyone knows this track, but this is the Alex Gopher and Etienne de Crecy remix, which I think is just, it's so good. But if you don't like club music, you'll hate it. Perhaps more audiophile friendly is the next track, Warmer Than the Sun by the Irresistible Force. And then we're back to kind of scary ass bass territory with Replicant by Special Request. That's from about 2017. It's one of the few EPs that I missed on vinyl the first time around, and now it sells for silly money and there hasn't been a repress. After that, I went with the Hidden Camera from Photech. That goes back to 94, 95. That's a very jazz-inflected drum and bass track. Some people might like it. And then we've got Poa Alpina from Biosphere's Substrata, which is just an ambient classic, that album. Total stone cold classic. I think anybody could listen to that because there really aren't any. Are there any beats in it? I don't think there are. And then yesterday I actually added a couple more tracks. I added Dub Smoke by Pitch Black, which is dub, obviously, from New Zealand. So Pitch Black are a New Zealand duo who have been going for like 25 years. They never really miss as far as I'm concerned. And then we've got Nautical Dub by Porto Rix. I think I mentioned that in a previous video. And then Consumed by Plastic Man, which is arguably his darkest and scariest record. And then lastly, I wrapped up this whole playlist with Amazon Amenity, the Chameleon remix by Link and E621, which is essentially Global Communication doing drum and bass. So yeah, this playlist was built in Tidal, but played back via Roon to the KEFs, and I would like to thank Roon for sponsoring this video. And yes, all of those cuts are electronic music, but that really goes against the grain of what I normally do. I normally split my playlists 50-50 between electronic music and non-electronic music, so guitar rock, indie rock, classic rock. So if you find yourself completely adrift with the artists that I mention in my videos, don't assume that they're electronic artists just because you don't know them. And I'll throw a bone to the audiophiles here because this morning I played Donald Fagen's Kamakiria. This is his second solo album. It's not as good as The Nightfly, but it's not terrible. I guess it's like the average of Steely Dan's output. I really like it. I mean, the production is incredibly polished. It's even produced by Walter Becker. It's such a great record, but it is very, very nice sounding. And as I said to a commenter underneath my last video, the music that I like is not determined by how good it sounds. Okay, before we get to listening, let's have a look at how the LS60 measure with one KC62 attached. And you can see how the bass reaches all the way down to 20 Hertz without issue. And it's important to note here that adding a subwoofer doesn't make the bass more pronounced or more obvious. It just goes lower, and it allows us to hear the sub bass in that Boards of Canada cut and that late career Kraftwerk remix. And hearing that sub bass for the first time really is a holy shit moment. And it's why I said in my last video that adding a subwoofer offers a far more dramatic improvement to what we hear than any change to the source format. And yet the noise made by high-res audio fanatics online is far louder than any noise made by subwoofer enthusiasts, and I think that's just arse backwards. And having special requests, Stairfoot Lane Bunker EP in high res, were it available, it's not, that wouldn't do anything for the track's sub-bass rumble if our loudspeaker system didn't first reproduce that sub-bass rumble. Now right now, some of you will be thinking, well, why not forego the subwoofer and just engage the extra bass mode in the LS60's app? And I did that, and it doesn't really do very much. As we can see from this measurement, it slows the LS60's bass roll off, but only marginally so. And there's no free lunch here either. I find the extra bass mode causes the LS60 to audibly compress earlier on the volume dial than when it's in standard mode. So adding a subwoofer gives us better bass extension without the audible compression. But as they say often in Australia, we're not here to f spiders. So I wasn't going to stop at one subwoofer, now was I? Because last year on a phone call to a patron, he told me that adding a pair of KC62 to his LS60 changed his life. So we can optionally connect a second sub to the back of the secondary LS60 speaker, and I took up that option. So I played the same Bass Bangers playlist and noted how Special Requests drum and bass sounds more enveloping with two subs in play. And I think this is also true of Porto Rix's Nautical Dub. Then I took another Room EQ Wizard measurement with the UMIC 1 microphone at the listening position. Now notice how the second sub gives us just a little bit more bass extension and maybe smooths its appearance. Now this is consistent with the room acoustics experts who tell us that multiple subs are one of the most effective ways to even out a hi-fi system's bass response in a room, because all loudspeaker systems play inside a room. Well, more or less they do anyway. And the room is the loudspeaker system's overlord. And when we measure at the listening position, we are taking a snapshot of a single point in space. But if we walk around our room, and I recommend you try this, you'll hear areas where the bass is strong and areas where the bass is weak. So when I do this with two subs in play, the audible differences between the weak and the strong areas are diminished. Now that's compared to having only one sub in play. So does that qualify as a side-by-side comparison? Yeah, I think it does. Now, if we go back to the subwoofer crossover settings inside the KEF Connect app, we notice we're not high-passing the LS60's mid-range driver, as we would do with a pair of two-way stand mounts, because the LS60 are a three-way design. So why would we bother high-passing the bass drivers? Now, you don't have to. You can disable the high pass filter should you so wish, but KEF tells me, because I asked them, KEF tells me that it leaves more in the LS60's tank to handle the bigger transients. Now, whatever the theory, the reality is that one sub elevates the performance of an LS60 system, but two subs gives us a little more low-end action with better bass distribution throughout the room. And this finding is consistent with the previous two times I've used a pair of subs in my Lisbon listening room, and links to those videos you will find in the show notes below. But let's think of this latest KEF scenario in this way. So if the LS60 is a three-way design, adding a sub to each channel turns the system into a pair of four ways with proper sub-bass reach. Anyway, that's all from me for today. Like and subscribe according to your preference. And don't forget, you can hit us up on Patreon if you want to see behind the scenes stuff and more playlists. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching. Okay, let's round out this video with a few extra thoughts. I'm not a room acoustics expert, far from it. Nor am I a subwoofer integration expert. I'm simply sharing what I've learnt so far with this experiment. With that in mind, I haven't talked about subwoofer placement in this video. That's an enormous topic, and that would fill an entire YouTube video by itself. And there are many people who have done that far better than I ever could. But I place my subs where they look best to me, but their position is also constrained by the power cables attached to the back. However, I would like to see KEF add some manual time alignment features to the subwoofer integration portion of its app, because being able to delay the speakers by say up to 10 milliseconds could be useful to time align their output with the subwoofers without having to physically move the subwoofers. And if KEF ever produces a second generation LS60, I hope they do, I'd love to see a shorter speaker with a slightly wider front baffle. And I would also like to see the LS50 Wireless 2's touch controls ported to the LS60's primary speaker, because I really miss those on top of the speaker. Now, lastly, a few years ago, I used EQ to generate the smoothest possible frequency response inside Room EQ Wizard measured at the listening position. And I did this just for kicks, and the result was a bloody awful sounding hi-fi system. So please be careful going down that road.